From February to October of 2002, two killers murdered people at random and left millions in fear. In just 10 months, the two ended the lives of 17 people and injured 10 others. Known as the DC or Beltway sniper attacks, this extraordinary planned series of shootings triggered one of the largest manhunts in American history, eventually leading to the capture of John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. Lee Boyd Malvo was born on February 18, 1985 in Kingston, Jamaica. His childhood was dominated by poverty and uncertainty. His parents, Una James and Leslie Malvo, never married and separated when he was a toddler. He rarely saw his father after that. Striving to provide a better life for her son, his mother often traveled to find work, leading to extended periods of time where Lee was left in the care of relatives and family friends. With each instance, a blend of anger and resentment developed within Lee. Throughout his childhood, neighbors and teachers observed the intensity of Lee's longing for a father figure. Around the age of 14, Lee and his mother left Jamaica and moved to the island of Antigua, where he would meet his partner in crime, John Allen Muhammad. John Allen Muhammad was 24 years older than Lee. Born on December 31, 1960 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, John Williams later changed his name to John Muhammad after joining the Nation of Islam. John moved to New Orleans as a baby when his mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. At the age of 3, she succumbed to the illness, leaving John to be raised mainly by his grandfather and an aunt. He enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard as a combat engineer in 1978 at the age of 18. John enlisted in the Army in November 1985 and was honorably discharged as a sergeant in April 1994. He was trained as a mechanic, truck driver, and as a specialist metal worker. John qualified with the Army's standard-issue rifle, the M16, and earned the Expert Rifleman's Badge. This badge represents the highest level of achievement in basic rifle marksmanship within the Army. John was twice divorced. He married his second wife Mildred in 1988, and they had 3 children together. Those who knew him described him as a great father. He would never raise his voice to his children, and his children were always known to have good mannerisms. After serving in the Gulf War, John returned home, and his wife noticed a change in him. He was angrier, darker, and felt bitter towards the Army and his country. She would later place a restraining order on him alleging abuse. John was arrested on federal charges of violating the restraining order by possessing a weapon. In 1999, he took his kids away from his ex-wife and moved to Antigua unlawfully. He made a living by producing fake documents and engaging in credit card fraud. In 2000, John would meet Lee and his mother. Una and John developed a strong friendship. She was desperate to move to the United States, and for $3,000, John provided her with the necessary visas and work permits to do so. She moved to Fort Myers, Florida, using the false documents and left her son with John. Seeing how John was a single parent dedicated to taking care of his children, Lee saw the perfect father figure in him. John treated Lee with the type of honesty and respect that he thought no one else did. Lee was converted to Islam by John in March of 2001. While John was in Antigua, his ex-wife was trying to track down her missing children. When authorities located John, they forcibly removed the children from him, and a date for a custody hearing was set. Despite his efforts, John failed to convince the judge that he was capable of assuming custody of his children. His ex-wife was awarded full custody with John having no visitation rights. John was at the lowest point in his life after losing custody of his children, sending him into deep depression and anger. From this moment on, John vowed to get revenge on his ex-wife. He began searching for her, eventually concluding that she was located somewhere in the D.C. area. John formed a deadly plan around this information, a plan that would require an accomplice. He began teaching Lee how to shoot at the local gun range every day after school. Lee became an exceptional marksman and developed extensive knowledge on firearms. John repeatedly encouraged Lee to play sniper video games in an attempt to ensure that Lee was desensitized to the events that would later occur. On February 16, 2002, John gave Lee his first test. Angry with Issa Nichols, the friend of his ex-wife who had encouraged her to seek a divorce, John sent Lee to kill her. Lee knocked on her front door, and Miss Nichols' niece, Kenya Nicole Cook, opened the door. She was shot in the face with a single bullet by Lee. She collapsed, and Lee immediately fled after making his first kill. Following the murder, Lee and John would travel all around the United States. robbing and killing people at random. Over the next 8 months, the pair would kill a total of 7 more people and injure 7 others in their attacks. Eventually, the pair arrived in Washington, D.C. John and Lee would drive around the area until they found a possible target. The attacks were carried out with a stolen Bushmaster XM-15 semi-automatic .223 caliber rifle equipped with a holographic weapon sight effective at ranges of up to 300 meters. Once they identified a target, they would get into position. The trunk of the Chevrolet Caprice was modified to serve as a rolling sniper's nest. The back seat was modified to allow a person access to the trunk. Once inside, the sniper could lie prone and take shots through a small hole near the license plate, while the other kept watch from the driver's seat. Their first target was a 39-year-old landscaper named James Buchanan, also known as Sonny. On October 3rd at 7:41 a.m., he was shot dead while mowing the grass at the Fitzgerald Auto Malls near Rockville, Maryland. 31 minutes later at 8:12 a.m., 54-year-old taxi driver Prem Kumar Walekar was killed while pumping gas at a mobile station in Aspen Hill. 25 minutes later, 34-year-old housekeeper and nanny Sarah Ramos was shot and killed while she quietly sat on a bench reading a book. Just over an hour later, 25-year-old Lori Lewis Rivera was shot and killed as she vacuumed her car at a Shell station in Kensington, Maryland. 12 hours after that, the snipers killed 72-year-old Pascal Charlotte as he was crossing the street on Georgia Ave at Kalmia Road in Washington, D.C. In each shooting, the victims were killed by a single bullet fired from around 80 to 90 yards away. The snipers would quickly strike and then vanish, leaving police with no answers to give to the community. Panic quickly gripped the region as news of the shooting spread like wildfire. Chief of Police for Montgomery County, Charles Moose, addressed the public in a press conference, revealing that schools were on high alert with a code blue status, keeping children safely confined indoors. Despite assurances of safety, concerned parents opted to pick up their children early, refraining from allowing them to take school buses or walk home. Montgomery County Public Schools, District of Columbia Public Schools, and private educational institutions initiated lockdown protocols, suspending outdoor activities such as recess and physical education classes. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement agencies from nearby states joined forces, lending their support through vital telephone tips. Police had only a few pieces of evidence to work with. Initial reports pointed to a white box truck, seen leaving the scene quickly after the Silver Spring attack. However, after the murder in D.C., witnesses began stating they noticed a blue Chevrolet Caprice instead of a white box truck. The police initially believed that all of the murders were carried out with a .223 caliber rifle. At this point, John and Lee began expanding to wider areas and leaving 2 or 3 days between each shooting. On October 4th, 43-year-old homemaker Caroline Sewell was wounded in the chest at 2:30 p.m. in the parking lot of another Michaels store at Spotsylvania Mall in Spotsylvania, while she was loading purchases into her minivan. On October 7th at 8:09 a.m., a 13-year-old student named Iran Brown was shot in the chest as he arrived at Benjamin Tasker Middle School. Brown sustained serious injuries, including damage to several major organs, but survived the shooting. Police discovered a shell casing as well as a tarot card at the crime scene. The tarot card was inscribed with the phrase, "Call me God," on the front, and "For you, Mr. Police." Code, "Call me God." "Do not release to the press," on the back. Despite the authorities' attempts to honor the request and keep the card's details confidential, the information was disclosed to the public just a day later. On October 9th at 8:18 p.m., 53-year-old civil engineer Dean Harold Myers was shot dead while pumping fuel at a Sunoco gas station on 7203 Sudley Road in Prince William County, Virginia. 2 days later, 53-year-old Kenneth Bridges was shot dead early in the morning while pumping gas at an Exxon fuel station in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. On October 14th, at 9:15 p.m., 47-year-old Linda Franklin was killed in a Home Depot parking lot in Fairfax County, Virginia. The snipers would not strike again until 5 days later, when on October 19th at 8 p.m., 37-year-old Jeffrey Hopper was shot in a parking lot near Ponderosa Steakhouse in Ashland, Virginia. He managed to survive the shooting. During the investigation, authorities found an extensive 4-page letter from the shooter demanding $10 million and containing threats targeted towards children. The letter also included a phone number for the police to call at a certain time and place. The phone number provided was not valid, but technicians at the Secret Service Crime Lab were able to match the handwriting to the tarot card left at a previous shooting. On October 22nd at 5:56 a.m., 35-year-old Conrad Johnson was shot and killed while standing on the steps near the 14,000 blocks of Grand Prix Road in Aspen Hill, Maryland. Coinciding with this event, Police Chief Charles Moose publicly disclosed a portion of the shooter's letter which stated, "Your children are in constant jeopardy, without respite, regardless of location or time." Police Chief Charles Moose was leading the investigation. The police investigated every shooting in the Washington, D.C. area. They implemented roadblocks, inspecting every driver that passed through. They also talked to as many individuals as possible in the areas and collected surveillance tapes. In an attempt to taunt the police, the shooters called them from a gas station's payphone. The shooters mentioned an unsolved shooting at a liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama. This was identified as a robbery and shooting taking place on September 21st. The gunman was then proven to be Lee Malvo after his fingerprints were found at the scene and matched to another fingerprint found at the Benjamin Tasker Middle School shooting. Malvo had a criminal record from being arrested as an illegal immigrant. Police researched Malvo's background and quickly made the connection between the two killers. They obtained information about the 1990 Chevrolet Caprice purchased by John Muhammad. Police discovered that the New Jersey license plate number issued for the Caprice had been checked by patrol cars several times near shooting locations in several states. But the car was never stopped because it was not connected to any criminal activity, and they were focused on looking for a white van. Authorities quickly took action and issued a media alert urging the public to be on the lookout for a dark blue Chevrolet Caprice sedan. An old friend of John Muhammad named Robert Holmes called the FBI and told them everything he knew about him and Lee. The FBI quickly gathered information and ultimately issued a warrant for the arrest of John Muhammad and Lee Malvo. A press conference was held announcing the license plate police were looking for, NDA 21Z. Just minutes after this announcement, a truck driver in Myersville, Maryland wrote down the license plate number and happened to notice the car at a rest stop off Interstate 70. Police were tipped off by the driver and another individual at the rest stop and quickly responded. They sealed off any possible escape routes before moving in to arrest the suspects. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on October 24, 2002, Muhammad and Malvo were arrested as they slept in their car. Police thoroughly searched the Caprice and found vital circumstantial evidence. In the vehicle, police found a laptop, logs of areas that the shooters scouted out as potential targets, and maps marking off places they had already shot people, as well as where they planned future shootings. The murder weapon was also discovered, and ballistics tests later linked the rifle to at least 11 of the shootings. Malvo's DNA was also found on the rifle, as well as both notes left at crime scenes. Muhammad's fingerprints were found through the vehicle and also on the murder weapon. Court-appointed psychiatrists thoroughly evaluated John Muhammad, yet the conclusions were never admitted as evidence in court, so the true motive for these crimes may never be known. During the pre-trial motions, investigators and the prosecution suggested that his primary target was his second ex-wife Mildred. With his ex-wife gone, he could possibly have gotten custody of his children again. The other shootings would serve as a diversion by making it appear she was killed randomly by a serial killer, so police wouldn't focus on her estranged ex-husband. By attempting to extort $10 million, another theory is that money was their motive. Despite this insight into Muhammad's possible motive, it was never made clear why he convinced a 17-year-old boy to be his accomplice. During Lee Malvo's psychological evaluations, he suggested that to gain a deeper understanding of him, psychologists should closely examine the film The Matrix. In the film, Keanu Reeves' character Neo is chosen by an older charismatic mentor to lead a revolution against an evil regime that had enslaved humanity. John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo both faced the death penalty during their trials, despite Lee only being 17 years old at the time of the shootings. Both Muhammad and Malvo were convicted of murder and weapons charges. In Muhammad's case, the jury recommended a death sentence, while in Malvo's case, the jury suggested a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, opting against the death penalty. On April 22, 2005, the Virginia Supreme Court upheld Muhammad's death penalty, ruling that he could be sentenced to capital punishment as the murder was deemed an act of terrorism. This line of reasoning was based on the handwritten note demanding $10 million. Despite arguments put forth by defense lawyers that Muhammad should not face the death penalty, as he was not the one directly pulling the trigger in the killings associated with him and Malvo, the court dismissed this line of reasoning. Muhammad was executed by lethal injection at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarratt, Virginia, on November 10, 2009. Lee Malvo was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole.